Michael Phillips will rejoin us here in just a few minutes, but right now it is our pleasure to welcome back to the show Ramona Shelburne of ESPN, their ESPN NBA insider. Ramona, how are we doing?
Good, how are you?
Doing well. So excited to talk to you about Michael Winger, the new chief executive for the Washington Wizards in Monumental Basketball. And Ramona, the question I would like to start is, how did we get him here in D.C.? This is a guy who seems to be extremely coveted. Other teams have pursued him, and yet here we are with this very questionable roster. And when I say questionable, there's a million questions to be answered about it. And yet here Michael Winger is taking this job. Why do you think ultimately this is the opportunity he jumped at?
I think it's timing, right? Like there's a sort of sense like he was in the background in Oklahoma City. He had a big job with the Clippers, but Lawrence Frank was the main guy, right? And so those of us who know Winger, like he's really a talented executive that has never really fully run his own shop and has been overqualified to do so for a long time. And I think like sometimes like it just gets to the point where you're like, okay, let's do this. Let's do it all on me now. And other people have tried to make that pitch to him, but the timing wasn't right, or the money wasn't right, or the opportunity wasn't right. And I think, I don't want to speak for Mike because he'll have to speak for himself on this one. But my guess would be, you look at where the Clippers are now in their life cycle as a team, and then you look at where the Wizards are, and he liked his options better with Washington. Like this is a better franchise to run for the next 5 years. The Clippers are, I don't want to say they're stuck, but they have an older, aging team that's over the second apron of the luxury tax. That's like going to be a hard thing to dig out from. They have two stars that haven't been able to stay healthy, and I don't know what would make you think that they would finally get healthy at the same time. Like maybe it's just a function of timing.
Yeah, it's funny because we felt so stuck with the Wizards, and then all of a sudden they move on from Tommy, and there's a lot of reporting that Leonsis is finally ready to, at least not necessarily that he's like, hey, go trade Bradley right now, but that there's the freedom to do that for the first time. So as Winger takes this job, like what do you kind of think the order of operations is for him, and how he, like what should be the strategic plan to build this team into a winner in the next couple of years?
Well, I think the first thing you have to look at is if all of our guys are healthy and if we get the best version of the current team, do we have enough to contend? Are we one or two moves away to contend? Or if we're not good enough, then what are we going to do to move forward, right? So this happened when he took over in Los Angeles. They had just kept Blake Griffin with that giant 5-year contract that they signed him to, and I think this is a pretty famous move in Clipper and NBA history. They have the big party for him in Staples Center. You're our guy, and they give the supermax contract, and then 6 months later he is traded to the Pistons. Like that was but I think they looked at it and said, even if Blake is healthy and we have everything else, like this team is just not good enough, and so that's the evaluation process that Michael Winger's going to have to go through when he gets to D.C. And, it's whether that means Brad Beal stays or goes, I don't know. I mean, he's really good at evaluating that kind of stuff and thinking very creatively about how to move forward. So it is, May 27th today?
26th, but who's counting?
26. I never know the day, by the way.
I don't either. I have it on a laptop screen in front of me. Otherwise, I would have no clue.
I think it's Friday. Not sure.
That I can't confirm.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's, you have like basically a month to the draft, and you've got a month to evaluate what you want to do going forward. Like you have to have that time. I know he's winding down his time with the Clippers and moving on to the Wizards like now, because you don't have that much time to come up with a plan, and they really need one going forward.
Ramona Shelburne, senior NBA writer for ESPN, is with us here on the Hoffman Show. So the Beal discussion is, as you can imagine, fairly wacky here in D.C. And where I kind of come down on it, Ramona, is he is far more valuable as a basketball player to a lot of other teams that have stars in place, specifically like a Philadelphia. than he would be as a basketball player here. That doesn't mean he's bad. It just means like they don't really have a way to be a good team while he's still here because of the way all their contracts are structured, etc. How does that then turn into a viable trade? And I think the Blake Griffin example is a good one. I'm sure you probably can think of others where you have a good player. You know when you trade that player, he's going to be successful somewhere else, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you should keep him as the incumbent team. So how do you try to come up with the value and work those trade talks, whether it's Winger being the lead guy on that or ultimately the GM that he's going to hire?
I mean, you have to think it really depends on what you how you want to build. Like, can you get the pieces that would fit around Brad Beal to turn the Wizards into a contender, right? Or are you more likely to be a contender if you keep Brad Beal and take the pieces that are around him and trade them, right? What's the fastest way there? What's the best way there? I think to me, Brad Beal is the type of player that you find on winning teams. Like, you find a guy who has his skill set, who's a great shooter. I mean, there's a reason why Team USA always wants him, right? Like, he's got that makeup, but you have to surround him in the right way. You can't make a lot of mistakes in the way you build around him. And so what I have felt like in the past is, it was never the right fit with him and John Wall. And ever since then, there's this sort of been a rotating cast of sidekicks or second players, but none of them have really either been the right one or good enough. And then once you get past the second best player, then you have to look at the bench. You have to look at the rest of the team. So I think when you have a player like Brad, like him, the biggest question is, do you want to build around him or do you want to use him to get you the players to build around elsewhere? And I think I don't know where Winger's going to land on that. I think Brad will check out very well when you measure him analytically. Like he stacks up very well on all of those. His contract is hard to build around because it's massive. But you don't give up on a player like that just because you haven't been able to surround him with the right cast. He's a really valuable player, and there's a reason. Like, if they ever decide to move him, they'll have a lot of options.
Definitely. Ramona Shelburne, ESPN with us, and I think you phrased that very similar actually to the way Winger did to the LA Times, like how important it is to have Brad on the roster, which does not necessarily mean that he will be on the roster when they open next season. Last thing I want to ask you about, because you've mentioned a couple times, like you know him being Michael Winger, like you've covered him obviously being LA based all these years. So last thing, Ramona, like who is Michael Winger? Who's the executive that Washington can get? And you described him as talented. Like, what are the talents that really stand out to you?
Like he always, how do I compare him to Sam Presti? He's sort of like Sam Presti without all the idiosyncrasies, He's sort of a grinder version of Sam Presti. Like Sam's very thoughtful and philosophical and all that, and dresses, he's got the cool slick back hair and the nice designer glasses and all that. And Winger's they barely even had a mugshot of him. Everybody keeps running the same picture because I think that's the only one that's on any wire service. He's just really behind the scenes. He's a family guy. Whenever I see him, we talk basketball. We talk about our families and stuff too. But he's just never been a guy that's really wanted the spotlight. He's never been a guy that he just kind of wants to come to work and do his job. And I think there's not a lot of people who have his background that would take sort of second in command chair at both of the franchises he's been at, because he really could just run his own shop. But he was fine. He doesn't have a huge ego about that. If anything, I think maybe the harder part of this job is for him to have the public persona that this job entails, to do the press conferences and to do the stories about himself and to sort of be that forward-facing guy. He's never done that before, and that'll be the part of the job he has to grow into. But in terms of, dealing with him in both Oklahoma City and Los Angeles, I think he's one of the most creative, but also strategic thinkers in this business. And when I talk about strategic, I mean 4 or 5 years out, he's playing the chessboard. When you're playing somebody, when you're working with somebody like that, it's somebody who really knows how one move this summer can lead to a move 2 summers from now. And that's the kind of strategic thinker, I think, a franchise like Washington that has a that hasn't been able to get into that contending spot in a while really needs.
No doubt. It's been a short-sighted franchise in a lot of ways the last couple of years, and hopefully he can help dig them out of that hole. Ramona, always great to chat. Hopefully next time we talk to you, we can talk some actual basketball as well, but really appreciate your perspective on Michael Winger.
Sounds good. You got it.
All right, thanks, Ramona. That's Ramona Shelburne, everybody, from ESPN.
This is Wes Unseld Jr.
Beal left wing outside the arc, stops, takes a three. It's there.
You listen to The Hoffman Show on Team 980.
Assassin like
on the Odyssey app.